It is a great honor and a pleasure to be here. And thank you to Move for Parkinson's, and thank you to the Phinney Foundation for inviting me to be part of this this amazing event today, and to look out at all of the faces who have been singing and dancing all along for the whole morning. I'm going to talk, and really to build on what Pat showed a bit earlier, to look at some of the ways that we can all, whether we're actually physically dancing or not, how we can integrate the way that dancers think about movement, about their bodies, about sequencing, how we can all integrate that into our daily lives, even when we're not actually dancing. So the first thing I want to emphasize is the transition from a world that might seem black and white, where we have limited choices, into a world of color, which is the world of the arts, a world where there are all kinds of nuances and all kinds of movements that are welcome and appreciated. As we always say in our classes, there is no wrong way to dance, and there is no wrong way to move. The program that we started in Brooklyn really started with one premise, and that is that that dance and information that dancers have is really useful to people with Parkinson's. Our program has nothing to do with Parkinson's. I almost feel like I shouldn't be here, right? We have nothing to do with Parkinson's. Specifically, we don't talk about Parkinson's in the class. We don't mention symptoms in the class. We don't address those symptoms head on by saying, here's an activity we're going to do specifically for this. However, and this is a big however, everything that dancers do to train their bodies and train their brains is really useful for people with Parkinson's. And dancers are very enthusiastic, as you could see from Patrick, to share this information with you generously and broadly. So although the class is not about Parkinson's, everything we do is relevant to and addresses things that everybody in this room has to deal with. So why are these people smiling? Why do they have such happy looks on their faces? Well, they're dancing. They're engaged in a fun, joyful activity. And they're also learning some very specific strategies to help them manage their movements and their thinking process a bit better. So the first thing that we learned in setting up our program in Brooklyn is that context changes everything. The place where you do activities related to your Parkinson's has an intense manifestation in how you think about that activity. So all of our classes pretty much are based in dance studios. And interestingly enough, when people walk into a dance studio, they don't think of themselves any longer as a patient. They think of themselves as a student and a dancer. And this happens around the world wherever these classes happen, because they happen in dance studios, community centers, art centers, theaters. Even in a hospital setting, they often happen in a multi-purpose room, an office building that's away from the clinical center. So context changes everything and changes the way we think about ourselves. The second thing, as I mentioned at the beginning, we don't start out thinking about symptoms in this class. So in many ways, the experience is demedicalized. This is key. When our company was approached by a woman named Oli Westheimer from the Brooklyn Parkinson Group, she said, I hear people in my support group spending a lot of time thinking about, worrying about, being anxious about Parkinson's. I want to do something that is not about Parkinson's, where people are not thinking about it all the time, where it takes it out of the medical context. And as we all know, Parkinson's is more than simply a medical issue, it's a quality of life issue. So to take it out of that and give people a chance to address other aspects of their lives in a safe and enjoyable setting is critical. One of the things we emphasize is that we're not trying to solve any problem in our class. Nobody, and this goes back to what Al was saying, nobody in our class has a problem. Our class is a community that welcomes people of all different abilities and all different mobilities to learn an art form together. And the key here is on lifelong learning, right? When you're engaged in the process of learning something new, especially when it's something as enjoyable and creative as dance, or any art form really, your mindset changes. You're not there to solve anything. You're there to learn. So the emphasis is on possibilities. Our classes, which are done seated, standing, holding on to something at a bar, can be done by people at all levels. Everybody is included, and we emphasize what they can do rather than what they can't do. We don't start from a place saying, well, you can't do this and this, so let's see what is still available. We say, here's what we can do together as a group. This also goes back to what other speakers have said, particularly what Al was saying, is that everybody in the room contributes and everybody participates. That includes partners, spouses, care partners, health aides, yes, even neurologists come to our class. The ultimate transition that happens, even if it's just for that hour and a quarter that our class happens, is that people who think of themselves or who are identified by society or by the medical profession as patients become dancers. Not only from an external perspective, not only through their friends and family who are there in the class with them, but to themselves. I am a dancer. And when people think of themselves as dancers, they tend to take care of themselves a little bit differently than if they think of themselves as a patient. They start to think, not only am I a dancer, but they start to think the way a dancer thinks about nutrition, hitting some of the 5 elements here, about complementary care, getting the physical therapy and exercise that they need, cross-training, and about the support that they need emotionally to do this. And in that transition, they take ownership of themselves in a very different way. They become part of a community. They become part of a community that welcomes them and that is focused on something unrelated to Parkinson's. This is a community that's focused on art, focused on creativity, focused on dancing together, focused on enjoyment. So let's look a bit more at this thing called dance, because I think some of us have an understanding that dance is a wonderful form of exercise, and you are absolutely correct. Dance is a terrific form of exercise. It gets the heart rate going, it's great coordination, it builds strength, it builds flexibility, and in this way, it's a wonderful synchronizing element to many other aspects that are already recognized in Parkinson's management: exercise, fitness, yoga, tai chi, physiotherapy, Zumba as something that's based on some forms of dance, but it's essentially a fitness regimen, all right? But in looking at these other forms, we start to see dance highlighting various elements of quality of life, of daily activities, that I would say sets it out a bit differently, and I'm sure Pat would agree with me on this. And in this way, actually touches on 4 of the 5 elements, everything but medication, that is particularly important to living well. So let's look at some of those elements. So first, in terms of exercise, we tend to look specifically at strength and stamina, flexibility, right? Being able to stretch and keep our muscles as fluid as possible. Postural stability, right? Making sure that we can support ourselves as we walk, as we run, as we get around the house. As you all know, there are many elements to managing Parkinson's well, and dance addresses those head on, and I'll explain why. Here are a couple of things that we have found in research that's been done on, preliminary research done on dance classes, that addresses some pretty astounding things. And these things are relevant to other movement forms, not just dance, but are particularly highlighting dance. I'm going to just talk about 2 of them here. One is movement sequencing. So what people with Parkinson's tell me again and again is, I have trouble figuring out how to get from point A to point B. Well, that's essentially what choreographers do. Choreographers spend their lives trying to figure out how to get dancers from point A to point B and make it look beautiful and rhythmic and entertaining for an audience. When you think about the way that dancers think about movements, it's always about making a sentence of movement. And it's that skill that, for some people, starts to go away. So the movement sequencing that happens in jogging is pretty simple. Right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left, for about half an hour. The movement sequencing that happens in dance class is much more complicated. And it requires new motor skill learning, it requires memory, it requires coordination, and all of the things are challenging but very, very good for us. The second thing I want to mention is confidence. The thing that we've heard again and again in the quality of life measures that are done on dance classes is that people gain a sense of confidence. A lot of this has to do with the fact that we focus on possibilities. What can we do? A lot of people come into the dance class, as Pat said, for the first time, never having danced before. And in a very short time, 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, they have learned a whole new set of skills that they didn't have before. This gives people a huge boost of confidence, a huge sense of, look at what I can do. Look at what's still available to me as somebody living with Parkinson's. I lied. I'm going to mention one more thing here, and that is relationship with partners. When we have an activity like dance that brings people together, that brings partners, that spouses, families, grandkids together in a class, people start to see each other in a very different light than they may at home, where things might be challenging. I know, things are frustrating. You start to have challenges in your partner that you didn't have before. But in dance class, it's sort of an equalizing ground. Everybody's there together to learn, to participate, and to enjoy together. So what do dancers do, and what's valuable in here that I can share with you? Well, the first thing is that we train every day. And I'm sure that Davis would agree with me, and anyone who's been involved with any kind of sport or athletics, that we have to think of ourselves as dancers and as athletes and really think in some way of training our bodies every day. We don't have the luxury of a couple days on the couch. We really need to be active, even if it's 10 minutes, even if it's doing 10 minutes of singing, 10 minutes of set dancing. That counts. That is training. And again, in doing that, you're hitting all of the key aspects of exercise: strength, flexibility, stamina. As this guy says, if ballet was easy, it would be called football. It's supposed to be American football, but it works for what you call football as well. Dancers don't just launch into movement without preparing for it. We think very hard about it before we go. In fact, we spend a lot of time thinking about it. It's called rehearsal. And we spend a lot of time preparing for it. It's called class and rehearsal. And then we go. So it's this process. We don't do anything without thinking about it, preparing for it, and going. And what this is actually is a movement plan. So before you do a complicated activity, you have to think, I set up, I'm going to do a turn, and here I go, and I do a turn, right? And I have practiced that for about 32 years, but also I still had to think about it, and I still had to prepare the right way. If I don't prepare the right way, nothing happens. I'm astounded by how few people I see wearing some kind of MP3 player or iPod, because music is probably the best guide we have as human beings to rhythm, mood, movement sequencing, and fluidity. You'll see, and I'm sure anyone who's been in a dance class, I'm sure Pat would agree with me, when you see the music come on, you all saw it today, many of you felt it. When the music comes on, it is the best guide that we have. It is a coach. It is a mentor. It tells us when to step. It tells us how quickly to step. So I would recommend, in addition to having a pack of your medications with you and a list of your medications, to have one of these. And I'm not doing product endorsement. This could be any brand, okay? But this is a great key. A lot of participants in our class who have discovered this walk around with that. And if they start to get locked or frozen, they actually put on their favorite tune, which is synchronized to be the same cadence that they have when they walk. And they use it as a wonderful tool. And of course, it's enjoyable too. It's not just a tool. All right, so this guy right here has a very difficult task. He has to lift this woman named Julie over his head every night without fail. This is a piece of Mark Morris's called L'Allegro. And if he were to do that as a mechanical goal, it would be quite stressful for him. May already be stressful anyway. And if he were to think of it simply in terms of this lift I have to do, it's difficult. But he doesn't think of it that way. The two of them, Julie and Peter, work together to create an image. And the image is of a bird in flight. This is a section of the piece where we're trying to imitate birds. And because they're both thinking of this image, it takes away the burden, the weight, the effort, and turns it into art. And that essentially is what we can all do, is leveraging the power of imagery to think about not just moving our arm up and down, but to think about moving our arm like a beautiful swan. And what this does is two things. One, it liberates you and gives you a whole new vocabulary. It allows you to tap into your imagination. And your imagination is a very powerful tool. The second thing that it does in our class is it allows people of all levels and abilities to participate. Because if the task was to say, I'd like everyone to lift his or her arm up to here, I would say a third of the class is unable to do that. Their shoulders are stiff, it hurts, they're not able to do that in terms of what strength they have. However, everybody in the room has the ability to use their imagination to move like a swan. And in doing that, everybody is empowered to participate in the act of movement. Dancers are told again and again in their training to give movement meaning. Very much like actors. When you're saying a line, it's not just a line. It's your feelings. It's your emotion. It's your character. You have to believe in every single line that you say, and a dancer has the same challenge. We have to believe in every single movement that we do. We have to know why we're doing it. It has to be intentional. And this is true for everybody in this room as well, in the general population as well. But it's not just a reach. It's you're reaching for something. It's not just a step. You're stepping forward to present yourself. So this kind of intentionality, what I would maybe even call gravitas, is very, very fundamental to dance training and really relevant to what happens in our classes. And this really dovetails with what we've been talking about. One of the main themes today is building the sense of community. It's very rare in a dancer's life that you get a solo. Maybe once, maybe twice. Most dancing occurs, whether it's social dancing or concert dance, which is my background, most dancing is done in groups. And thank goodness, because it's much easier and much more fun to dance in a group. What happens when we dance together is that we form bonds that previously did not exist. They're bonds that don't exist necessarily and don't get formed when we just talk to each other, when we have a drink together. They're very special bonds that happen when we form a dance together. And I would argue that we are wired to connect this way. We've probably been connecting this way as a species for 5,000 or 10,000 years, ever since we stopped throwing rocks at each other. Well, wait. We're still doing that, unfortunately, and started to dance with music. A very, very old way for communities and villages to connect together and tell stories. Finally, and I have to evoke Gene Kelly for this, the essence of movement is joy. And this is something that you saw very clearly in Pat's wonderful demonstration and the demonstration of his dancers. That first and foremost, this is an activity that is joyful. And there's absolutely nothing to be ashamed of in that. And I have to go back to something Dr. Henchcliffe said a couple of years ago, and she was interviewed for an article about a dance program, and she said, "We don't know how to measure joy yet, but we should." And it's something that those who are enlightened in the neurological community are seeing in activities like dance and exercise and yoga, and start to understand why joy is so important to us and to these dancers. So why these smiles? I want to bring this to close by looking at this photo for a moment. And this, for me, represents a new vision for how people with Parkinson's can live well. This is a group of dancers in Oakland, California, in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and they've just completed a performance. This is a performance that was made specially for them, choreographed for them by a choreographer named Claudine Naganuma. And for me, even though they're actually standing still in this curtain call, it encapsulates everything that I think is positive about dance and the arts in general as being a piece of the pie, one of those elements. Their sense of pride, their sense of joy, their posture is very, very good. Their creative powers are coming forward. They're not ashamed to share those and to perform those, to actually be out and about with their Parkinson's. The sense of community is palpable, not only in the way that they join hands, but this sort of unspoken understanding that they're involved in something very powerful together, and that because they're doing it together, they will keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it and keep doing it. And that quality of adherence, which is very important to researchers, right? The fact that people will go back and do something is one of the key elements that we see in a dance program. So emblazon this image in your head, because for me, this is really the present and I hope the future of how we can all live well with Parkinson's. So how do we translate some of this into how we think in our everyday lives about managing things, about how we get into the mind of a dancer? Well, the first is to turn doing, sort of a random process of just going through the movements, into thinking about it as training. Remember that dancers are one of the only artistic professions who actually still take class after they get a job, all right? So dancers at all levels of their professional careers take a daily class for an hour and a half. It's the training. It's the practice. Musicians do the same thing. They get up and they practice for 2 to 3 hours, even though they're still performing, yeah? Especially since they're performing. So, and going through that process of thinking, preparing, and doing. Think about what you need to do before you do it. Second, learning new things and practicing what you already know. So when I go into a dance class, usually a ballet class, I always start with pliés. And I've been doing pliés for 32 years. I'm not bored with them, though, because I know how important that move is. And it's important for me to repeat it week in, week out. But at the end of class, I'm also learning a new sequence of movement that I've never done before. And that process of repetition with the process of learning new skills is incredibly important to keeping our brains active and stimulated. Number 3, let music be your guide and partner. Walk around with music. Carry it with you. Don't just use it as background. Listen to the rhythm. Listen to the tone of it. Find music that you enjoy. Every single person in this room probably enjoys some form of music. It doesn't have to be the same music that we play, that Pat plays. It's your music, and it's there for your enjoyment and your benefit. Number 4, think of yourself as a choreographer. A friend of mine who takes dance repeated classes in Berkeley, California, just next door to Oakland, tells me that he once got stuck in a grocery store. He started to go off. His medication wasn't working, and he started to feel himself get frozen. He started to panic. And then he remembered what he learned in dance class. And he started to think about himself as a choreographer. He said, if I think of this challenge as not just getting from point A to point B, but dancing from point A to point B, I'm going to be able to get moving. And indeed, he did. He thought of himself as making up a dance, and by thinking of it as a dance, he was able to start moving again. You can be your own choreographer, whether it's getting out of a chair, whether it's getting around a difficult corner in your home. Think about it as dance. Think about it as choreography, which is essentially planned activity with music. Finally, harnessing the power of imagery. Find an image that works for you for something that's particularly difficult, whether it's picking something up off the floor. Make it something wonderful. Make it a gift. Whether it's something up here, make it an apple that you're really wanting to eat. It can be something sublime or ridiculous, but it's got to be something that you connect with. And that's the key, using imagery to harness what you want to do and focusing on how you move, not just what you do. Are you moving with softness? Are you moving with intent? You have control over that range as the artist in each of you can really grab onto that. I want to emphasize here that this is my boss, Mark Morris, choreographer, that dance isn't for everybody. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but it is for anybody. Anybody is welcome to the dance, and anybody can participate. But if dance isn't your thing, find other forms of movement, exercise, tai chi, yoga, that work for you. Again, there's no set prescription here. The key is to move. I happen to think that dance has a lot of benefits to offer. It may not be your thing. Find something that is your thing.